Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pradibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Graditam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitaamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambattvamanusandhadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajwalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetre Kapanai Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gitam Ritaduhe Namaha Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdim Gitam Ritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us all once again. We are in chapter 17, probably roughly the middle. And after talking about the three types of food, Krishna started describing the three types of yagna, which means fire ceremonies or some sacred offerings of that sort. And of those yagnas, we have heard the sattvic version and the rajasic version. So sattvic means pure, rajasic means sort of selfish yagnas. So it's kind of hard to believe that there would be selfish offerings or selfish fire ceremonies, but he explained that last week. The best attitude is to make our whole life a sacred offering, as Amma does. Her every thought, word, and action are an offering to the divine. Divinity is her everlasting nature, and she also sees that divinity in all beings. So, in truth, Amma cannot do anything but sacred offering. Everything by default becomes that. And she also inspires us to serve not only humanity, but all of nature as well. And that means that the karma yoga path for us is a kind of sattvic puja or yagna, because everything we do is to burn away our vasanas, and in the process we try to help people. So it's a doubly good approach, and we're going to hear about the rest of the yagnas tonight, and a new topic which we'll hear about in a moment. But we will resume from verse 13. Vidihinam asrishtannam mantrahinam adakshinam Shraddha virahitam yajnam tamasam parichakshate. Now we'll chant it together. Vidihinam asrishtannam mantrahinam adakshinam Shraddha virahitam yajnam tamasam parichakshate. The meaning is the sacrifice done with no respect to injunctions, in which no food is offered, which is devoid of mantras, dakshina. I'm changing gifts to dakshina. And faith is said to be tamasic. So there's no respect for the scriptural injunctions, no food, no mantras, no dakshina, no faith. Okay, so let's hear what the commentaries have to say. This is the worst kind of offering, so-called offering, that you can make. Shankaracharya says that offered, in other words, food is offered normally, but it says that no food is offered. It means no food to the ones who conduct the sacrifice. Imagine somebody comes from a long ways away, spends the time preparing everything, and then does the whole ceremony, and they don't even give them food. Typically, you give everybody food. And devoid of mantras, Shankaracharya says, it means hymns that are defective in intonation and pronunciation. So they're chanting something, but it's a complete mess. That's basically what it means. And dakshina, I'm going to explain in a moment, but that is to the pujaris, to the ones who actually conduct the ceremony. They're not getting dakshina. Okay. You'll hear about that very soon, don't worry. Jnaneshwar says, in his typical whimsical and allegorical way, when the wind needs to find its own way for blowing, or when death comes after determining the auspicious time, or for fire to feel afraid to burn an unholy thing, only then will tamasic sacrifices be according to the rules. In other words, it's never going to happen. A tamasic yagna, that means the worst type of offering or ceremony, is unrestrained, caring neither for the prescribed procedures nor for the proper incantation of mantras. Where the pujaris are looked down upon with a feeling of contempt, what scope is left for giving any gifts? I mean, if you haven't shown any, decency to them, you're definitely not going to feed them. In the fullness of his self-conceit, in the fullness of his self-conceit, with absolutely no faith in such sacrifices, enormous wealth is squandered in vain. Now, a more modern commentary has a few good things to say here. All good deeds that are conducive to public welfare are emphatically commanded in the scriptures. Therefore, they all may be undertaken even without consulting the scriptures. So let's say somebody, an elderly person needs help. You don't look at the scriptures and say, should I help her or not? Some of the things are obvious. So we should do them without any hesitation. But whatever is harmful, it is prohibited by the scriptures, which are the infallible guides. So if you're not quite sure whether something is prohibited or not, then you can definitely, check what the scriptures say. Then he says, beings depend on food for their existence. Voluntary distribution of it is thus a mark of consideration and regard for beings. Cherishing beings with food is a form of worshiping God. So this is what Amma would say, I feel, because she sees God in everything. I remember a long time ago, there was a scorpion on a piece of wood that we were trying to move in the back part of the ashram. Now that's the big main hall. And somebody picked up a piece of wood and there was a scorpion underneath. And then he freaked out and he took the piece of wood and he was about to smash it. And I said, stop! She grabbed his arm and stopped him. It's just doing its nature. That's what it is. Why do you want to kill it for being what it is? It's because we don't want to be killed just for who we are, right? So that is a form of worshiping divinity in everything. And mantras, this is a beautiful way of putting mantras. He says, Mantras are the external indications of the solemn determination and noble intents behind an action. So you're about to do something, and they say, I'm just going to do it right now. You know what I mean? That's not, there's no power, there's no real solemn determination in that. But if you chant at least your mantra or Ammas Vyayamo before you start something, that shows that we have a noble intent for this thing we're about to do. An undertaking devoid of elevated ideas is more mechanical than human. Very often we act mechanically, but if we chant something that has a deep meaning, then elevating ideas are more likely to appear in our mind. And he says, reverent gifts are to be made to those who participate in a yajna with an attitude of service. Gifts must also be made to other deserving people and to good causes. Above all, any holy undertaking devoid of faith is to be avoided. So sometimes you might go to an assembly and there's a lot of ostentation and show, but you don't feel any, devotion or any faith. Then you might not feel like that atmosphere is good for you. That's what he's talking about. Now, you may or may not know how these ceremonies are conducted. When the scriptures prescribe a ritual, there are so many detailed instructions, and then there are a lot more instructions that are not written down anywhere, but they have to be learned through practice. So you're like an apprentice for a few years and you learn from somebody, you make mistakes, you get corrected, and then only then do you understand how to do it properly. So there are the right herbs, there are certain types of prasad, or what we say, like the final, prasad is the only thing we have, like it's a little bit of sweet pudding or something they give you in your hand, just one spoonful. So that varies between the rituals. There's an auspicious time, there are different mantras for different deities, there are different mudras, hand gestures for different steps and everything. So you can't just say, I'm going to do it however I want. It's not a matter of personal preference, because the rishis choreography, they choreographed everything, and they orchestrated everything for the sake of world peace. So that is why faith is a fundamental precondition to a yajna. To receive the desired outcome, it should be performed with full faith and following the traditional instructions. So why is the distribution of food so important? Why can't we just have a service and then go home? We can, but we wouldn't call that a yajna. In India's tradition, it is mandatory in a yajna, but it doesn't have to be like a full meal every time you do it, because in Amrita Puri they do Ganapati Homa every morning and many other ceremonies. So at the end of that Homa, that fire ceremony, they will just give you a little spoonful of sweet pudding or something like that. And anyhow, 3 meals a day are being served to everybody, so there's no need to have like a big banquet every time. But if it's a rare occasion in a place that we rarely go to, we will probably serve a meal, or the local people will provide a meal to everybody who comes. And that gives people more happiness, is a way of showing gratitude for us to God and to all the people also for a successful completion. And we show especially show gratitude to all who made it happen. And those who selflessly maintain that spiritual heritage should also be taken care of. And we have to give them food at least. Let's say the person who teaches you how to do this thing comes. You have to give them some food or a place to rest or something like that. And when you give anything to such people, selfless people, it is guaranteed that they will share with everybody, especially with the poor people. And traditionally, wherever a yajna takes place, there will always be distribution of food and clothing, which means that the vulnerable segments of society are protected. Temples also provide regular help in order to, in addition to their contributions to mental health, means helping people transcend their challenges in life. They help in education, and they also help in cultural preservation. And Amma has said that all art forms, culture, food, music, all of it emanated from temples, along with values and virtues. And though the translation says completely devoid of mantras, like Shankaracharya says, it really means it is devoid of properly chanted mantras. Now, getting to that word dakshina. Dakshina is just a gift, or you can't really call it obligatory because you could just not give it if you don't want to. But most of the time people give it as a sign of, a token of gratitude. But there are other people who might focus on making things look really nice, but they don't think of giving a donation to the poor old priest who knows how to do the homa. The most important thing is the knowledge. That's not just with these ceremonies, everything in life. It is the knowledge that is the most important. So dakshina is a way of recognizing the value of knowledge. In this case, that's regarding yagnas. No faith. Well, there's a lot of things we could say about that. Having a ceremony performed in your house doesn't necessarily mean that you have faith. Let's say the host is a conformist and just doesn't want anybody to gossip about him. If I don't do it, they'll say he's a miser or whatever, so I better do it, just to be safe. Or it may be out of fear. If I don't do this yagna or this fire ceremony, something bad might happen to me or to my family members. So this is not faith, this is fear, right? So we can't, that doesn't qualify actually. It should be out of love for God or a genuine faith. So these are all indicators of tamasic yagna, which is even worse than rajasic yagna, which came before last week. Why is tamasic worse than rajasic? Well, rajasic people will follow the scriptures at least. They will at least try to chant properly, and they will give a dakshina because they know the rules. And they won't hurt anybody in the process. They're just egoistic and selfish. But in tamasic yagna, the yagna itself is performed incorrectly. And the motive can also be harmful to somebody. They may want to conduct a puja to destroy their competitor's business or something like that. They will do things that are harmful to others just to benefit themselves. So the summary of these three types of yagnas is sattvic means it is for the welfare of all beings. Rajasic means it is for my welfare only. And tamas means my welfare is most important even at the expense of other people's welfare. Then Jnaneshwar gives us an introduction to the next few verses. He says, austerities are threefold, according to the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. The performance of one creates sin, and the other leads to liberation. Austerity is also threefold, austerity of body, speech, and mind. So we're going to hear about these next. Verse 14. Deva Dvija Guru Prajna Pujanam Shaucham Arjavam Brahmacharyam Ahimsa Cha Shariram Tapa Uchate. Now together. Deva Dvija Guru prajna pujanam shauchamarjavam brahmacharyam ahimsa cha shariram tapa uchate. It means worship of the gods, the twice born. I'm going to switch Brahmins for twice born. And elders doesn't come in there, so we can omit that, I believe. So worship of the gods, the twice born, gurus and wise people, purity, straightforwardness, continence, and non-violence. This is called bodily austerity. Jnaneshwar has some nice things to say here. He's describing the person who practices this. That's what it seems to me. At the very sight of the Shiva Linga, or the image of Lord Vishnu, his body automatically lays prostrate like a stick dropped down on the floor. He renders devoted service to those who have risen to the position of high honor through their pious acts, humility, and other good qualities. So we can think of that second half, these kind of people that they're helping. That means they're sincere seekers. So if somebody, a sincere Amma devotee, suddenly comes to Chicago and needs some help, people will say, oh, I know this person, he's doing sadhana, he's a devoted person, let's help him or her. And then he goes on to say, he gives shelter to those in distress, either through the fatigue of travel or disease. He worships the Guru, who imparts knowledge liberally, and seeing whom all the fatigue of dreadful samsara is relieved. The next sentence is very symbolic, so we're going to have to go through it a little bit slowly. He burns to ashes in the furnace of his own righteous acts the alloy in the form of body identification by giving coatings of constant scriptural studies. I had to deconstruct the sentence to understand, what the proper order is. So this is what I got out of it. Alloy means a mixture of things, right? So the alloy is the identification with the body, mind, and intellect, because we've got the Atman, which is mixed up with the physical body, which is mixed up with the mental body, the subtle body, and then the intellect, and they're all made up of sattva, rajas, and tamas. So it's a big alloy. And that is burned in the furnace. What furnace? The furnace of good deeds, which means our karma yoga. This is the practice of spirituality, right? So that's the location. It's burned in that furnace. How is it burned? By the scriptural studies. And that is jnana yoga, or the theory behind spirituality. So you have the theory ready to go. It's like the wood or the flame, and that flame burns in the furnace of our good deeds. So when you're practicing karma yoga, you're not doing it just for fun. You have this constant remembrance that this is how I purify myself. This is how I make myself eligible to understand deeper teachings. And what are we burning? We're burning our attachment, basically. We call it identification, but it's basically attachment to the body, mind, and intellect. Then he continues saying, with the full knowledge that the Paramatman abides in all beings, he bows to them and continues serving others in all possible ways, while he himself remains particular in restraining his senses. I find the next sentence pretty humorous. His only contact with a woman was when he was born. So for girls, we could say, infancy. The only time she had any contact with a man was when she was a baby. And then he says, after that, he remains clean and aloof throughout the remainder of his life. When the body conducts itself naturally in such a pure and simple way, bodily tapas can be said to have attained perfection. Wow. That is a tall order, but I guess he wouldn't be saying if it weren't possible. A more recent commentary says, useful metals are extracted by melting different ores. Okay, we know that. Old and scrap metals are renewed by the same process of melting. Okay, we knew that. The life of a person can similarly be renewed and rejuvenated by the heat of tapas. Ah, I didn't know that. It is a boon with which one is endowed so that they may reform and recreate themselves into a higher order of existence. That gives a lot of hope to people. Now the twice born, what are they? Well, he explains it here. The twice born are named so because of being born again mentally for a dedicated spiritual life. I'll talk about that myself a little bit later. Gurus are those who set an example of spiritual life through their own actions. We couldn't ask for a better example. The wise are those who are awakened to Brahman. So he's saying that they're actually God realized. They have transcended body consciousness. So it's not just they're wise in years or so on. It's the real deal. And he says, by worshipping all these wholeheartedly, the aspirant is cast in their mold. So let's say you have a mold that makes a picture of an angry person, and then you don't want to be cast in that mold. You want to be cast in a mold that is happy. So if you have a mold for Lord Krishna or for Amma, we want to be cast in that mold. So that's what he's saying. That's how you do it. And recognizing the sacredness of all beings and refraining from hurting any of them is ahimsa. I wanted to give you a couple of alternative words that were used here. Continence was used, but really it means celibacy. I mean, I'll talk about it in a moment, but literally it means celibacy. And non-violence, I'm not sure, maybe you guys can tell me what you think, but I think violence is kind of a little extreme, but injury, non-injury, covers a broader scope of things. To me, it seems like that. Okay, now I have a few more things to share. When Krishna opens the topic of austerity, he starts by defining tapas, which we would translate as asceticism or austerity, on multiple levels. So the body level, the speech level, and the level of thoughts. And he has one verse for each level. And only after that will he apply the previous method of dividing them into three categories based on sattva, rajas, and tamas. So now that we understand that tapas applies to these three levels, what is the goal of tapas, period? The goal is to establish mastery over those three levels of our being: bodily, speech, and thoughts. And it makes sense because before we attain the highest liberation, we should liberate ourselves from the lower slavery, like what our body says we should do, our words and our mind. The mind tells us to do things. The mind is like an autocrat or a dictator all the time. And so we don't want to become their slave, because either we master them or they will enslave us. So that's what tapas is about. It's trying to free yourself from the grasp of those want-to-be dictators. And Krishna said beautifully in chapter 6, verse 5 and 6. This is again a very sort of cryptic couple of verses, so you might not get it the first time, but I'll share some other teachings that make it a little more clear. Krishna said, "May a person raise their self by their self." So when we write in English, the first self is lowercase, and then the Atman self is capitalized. So the little self by the great self. Let them not debase their self. So you don't want to insult the God within you, the Amma within you. They alone, indeed, are their own friend. They alone are their own enemy. That's clear. Only one who has conquered their self by their self, in other words, one whose Atman has subdued the lower self. The higher self subdued the lower self. That's what it is, basically. Only one who has achieved that is their own friend. The self, or the higher self of one who has not conquered their self, will behave with enmity like a foe. So, if you have not identified with your higher self, your lower self is going to become your enemy. That's the idea. And in Dhammapada, which is one of the earliest record of Buddha's teachings, as far as I know, there are a couple of verses that go very well. I just took them in the original format and I turned them to the haiku 575 just because it feels, I don't know, I like it. So here is how it goes. Fearful foe it is, the unguarded mind harms most, until you tame it. Who else can it be? Subdue yourself, then you see you are your master. So an untamed body and mind become our enemies, while they become our ally when they are tamed. This is true for everything in life. Just think, is a sharp knife your friend or foe? Well, it depends. If you know how to use a knife, it is your friend. I can still remember going into my parents' bathroom when I was, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7. And I just opened one of the drawers and, curious George, little kid, I was grabbing at things and I picked up a shiny thing, very thin and shiny thing, and I cut myself because it was a razor blade. I never did that again. So I didn't have the knowledge of how to use a razor blade, so it became my enemy, but I don't have that problem anymore. Well, I don't use it anyhow, but even if I did. So if you know how to drive, your car will take you to your desired destination, but if you lose control of your car, you will end up in the hospital or worse. So any kind of vow can be considered to be tapas. All forms of tapas help us strengthen our resolve, our willpower, as well as our self-confidence. So instead of doubting ourselves, even a small vow means like you say, I'm going to do something, and then you try to fulfill your promise to yourself. Even a small vow will increase our confidence, and that later helps in self-transformation. The key is to start with something realistic for you, and your willpower will gradually increase over time. I think that's why Amma says that spirituality is a contract that you make with yourself. But she says no. And one more thing, that contract has to be renewed every day. So it's tough. Tapas involves both do's and don'ts. In yoga language, that means niyama and yama. On the bodily level, it translates into doing things and not doing things. In this verse, Krishna first recommends worship of the gods, respect for twice born, gurus, and wise people. So these are all do's, right? So a few more things about twice born, as they're called. Our first birth is from the mother's womb, and the second is from the guru's wisdom. Amma has said many times when she's preparing a new satsang, she says it's like being pregnant. She's gestating the ideas, and then she gives birth to the satsang, on the stage or whatever it is. So really, the guru's guidance is a womb. Her teachings are a womb for us. And that's what brings about our second birth, a life of dharma and ultimately moksha. We strive to live for the greater good, taking as little as possible for ourselves and leaving as much as possible for others. It is very close to the life of a sannyasi. Anybody can do it, and it's almost like being a sannyasi. So such people who are sincere, they should also be shown some respect. And since it is tapas of the body that he's talking about here, that word worship is just, at this point, it's just the physical version. So just like you chant Lalita Sahasranamam, someone would say, did you do Archana? I said, I did Archana. Okay, I did it, right? They don't say, were you concentrated? Did you have love in your heart as you did it? They don't ask that. So we're talking about the physical thing. It's like a physical routine. But hopefully there's more than a physical routine to that. But it's not going to happen unless you sit down and do it. So that's physical discipline. The content, that's another thing. That's coming up later. For the word wise, Krishna uses a word which is prajna. And that can even mean somebody who is self-realized. So it's kind of a broadly widely translated. It has a broad meaning. So what does purity mean in this verse? Well, again, it's physical, right? We're talking about bodily things. So it is the physical cleanliness, it's hygiene, it's purity of the temple we call the body. And mental purity is going to come next, later. Straightforwardness refers to the alignment of our thoughts, words, and actions. So let's say I call you and say, I'm going to meet you at 4. I'll meet you in such and so place at 4 p.m. But I show up at 30 minutes late, no good reason, just lazy or lack of shraddha. So it's really important to keep our word and be punctual. Just don't say something that you're not really serious about. And that's a bodily discipline because it's the follow-up that we're talking about here. If you say something, the follow-up is necessary. That follow-up is actually the physical part of it. It has been said that everyone should have integrity and wisdom. Integrity is fulfilling every promise you have given, while wisdom is to not give foolish promises. And the only 2 don'ts in this verse are brahmacharyam and ahimsa. The rest of them were all do's, right? So brahmacharyam typically means celibacy, which is kind of you're avoiding something. So it's kind of a don't. And ahimsa means you don't hurt, so it's a don't. Literally, brahmachari means one who walks or practices the path of Brahman. Brahman means the Supreme Being. In the student life, which is up to age 20 traditionally, such a person maintains only 3 relationships. That's God, Guru, and Scripture. That's why you have this shika in the back. It's a little tuft of hair. That symbolizes the attachment to God, Guru, and Scripture. But believe it or not, when you do a sannyasa ceremony, you cut that off and throw it in the fire because you're not supposed to have any attachments at all. So the Guru, you're supposed to see the Guru everywhere, God everywhere, and so on. So nothing should be more important for a brahmachari than his spiritual growth and practicing his Guru's teachings. So not even food, no comfort, that doesn't matter. You get it, you don't get it, doesn't matter. Just your spiritual growth and the Guru's teachings. And in a general sense, it means one who has self-control. Shankaracharya says that we should treat food as a medicine. Really? Medicine for what? He says, medicine for the disease of hunger. It's not for the taste. So we can think like this, the next time your body craves comfort, you can remind it that even Amma sleeps on the floor. And you can ask your body, are you working harder than Amma? You need to have that bed because you're doing a lot of seva, and you're hugging millions of people, right? No? Okay, then why do you need this? Right? Amma doesn't beautify herself with makeup. She doesn't need to, number one. But she doesn't have to do that. She's not interested in designer clothes or anything. But still, millions of people have been attracted to her for over 50 years. They're coming from all over the world. This should be proof to our mind that the real attractant is something else. And Amma has that in abundance. It is her immensely powerful spiritual aura, her love. And ahimsa here, remember, this is only on the physical level. So it means like hitting somebody or beating them or whatever it is. It's not like emotional injury. We haven't gotten to that level. Okay, verse 15 next. Anudvega karam vakyam one more time. Anudvega karam anudvega karam vakyam. That's how it should be. Anudvega karam vakyam satyam priyahitanchayat swadhyayabhyasanam swadhyayabhyasanam chaiva vanmayam tapa uchate. One more time together. Anudvega karam vakyam satyam priyahitanchayat swadhyayabhyasanam chaiva vanmayam tapa uchate. Some of these verses are hard to break down. Okay. Speech that causes no annoyance to others and is truthful, as also agreeable and wholesome, and the regular study of Vedas. These are said to form the austerity of speech. So there's 4 key points before I share the commentaries. The 4 key points are that it should not be annoying, it should be pleasant, it should be beneficial and true. And all 4 of these points have to be covered for it to qualify as the austerity of speech. Shankaracharya says that annoyance is pain to living beings. So it's not just human beings. And some people translate it as distress. So I think annoyance can sometimes because somebody is really sensitive, perhaps. But distress is just a kind of a relative expression. So some kind of distress, they're suffering, in other words. And agreeable can also be translated as pleasant here. Wholesome can also be considered to be beneficial. So the Sanskrit words have multiple meanings. We can take it either way. So annoyance or distress is to living beings. And Shankaracharya clarifies an interesting point. He says like pleasant speech is something that you can see. You hear it and you see their face. But wholesome and being beneficial, you don't see that right away. It takes time, so it's invisible, it's unseen. And the combination of all these attributes is what is meant here, just like I said a moment ago. Jnaneshwar has many things to say, for almost everything today. We can discern a person's saintly character through their speech, which gives pleasure without hurting anyone. Water, while going mainly for the purpose of watering a tree, also gives life to the grass that grows in its course. In that way, their words intended for a particular individual also prove beneficial to all others. You know, when Amma's scolding these kids for being sort of like restless and they're not speaking truthfully or all these reasons. She's got her like eagle eyes on them all the time. And she says something, we should think that applies to us also. We think, oh, the kid's doing something wrong, and then have I ever done that? You know, not as a kid, like recently. And we have our own version of it. So while we're laughing at the little kids, we can laugh at ourselves also. Like the holy Ganges makes all beings immortal, renders pure and holy all who bathe there, their words remove spiritual ignorance, bring about reunion with the Supreme Self, and no one ever feels bored hearing them, just as one never feels tired of drinking nectar. The word nectar is amrita. So we don't get tired when Amma is talking about all these things. We're mesmerized because it's nectar for us. We're drinking it down as she speaks it. And then he says also, they speak only when asked, which this is tough for most people, right? Otherwise, they are engaged in reciting the scriptures again and again, or in singing bhajans. To be always reciting and repeating the names of God is what is called the austerity of speech. So here I want to share a story that actually was narrated by Amma 2 days ago during the live stream. That new book was released, right? Swami Pranavamritananda ji he gave his book to Amma and she released it. And he was, reciting a poem which was both beautiful and also playful. And what he said made Amma remember something. She, spoke something in between. And she said that actually, you might have seen her go like this when she was talking. What she was saying at that time is that he used to chant his mantra so incessantly and so intensely that he would get spittle on the side of his mouth. And people would make fun of him. But he was so immersed in his mantra japa that sometimes he would be a little careless. He was very careful about his mantra, but he was so focused on it that a few things, he didn't catch. And he broke a pot. And his main thing was he was so afraid of Amma catching him make a mistake when he made a mistake. So first he looked around and he said, was Amma here? Was she watching? And then Amma said that from a distance she saw it and she says, hey, what did you break over there? And then something else happened. She caught him, and there was one more thing, I can't remember. There were so many funny things that happened during that book release because he was kind of encouraging it. But he's famous for how much he used to chant his mantra. I'm sure it's happening internally all the time anyhow. But it's a beautiful story. There are a lot of stories about him, and he has to share them himself. A more modern translation, commentary says, the harm done through speech is often more painful than that caused by physical violence. Now we talked about ahimsa on the physical level. Now he's emphasizing on the emotional level. Rash and hurtful words should by all means be avoided by a spiritual aspirant. So Amma has emphasized that point in another way. One year she had a satsang where she was talking about a desperate person, lost his money, family left him. He was so distraught that he thought of ending his life. And then he found a bridge, very high bridge over a river, and he figured that, well, if he jumped off that, then, that would be the end of it, and he can just put an end to his misery. And as he was sitting there looking out into the sky, he said, okay, I'm just going to take one more chance. I'm going to sit here, I'm going to stand here for a while, and let's see who the first person is who crosses this bridge. And if that person says something nice to me or pleasant to me, then I'll regain my confidence in humanity. But if he looks down, he doesn't smile, and if he just shows contempt to me, that's it. I'm jumping over the bridge. And then Amma stops there and she says, if it were us who walked across that bridge next, what would the outcome of his life been? Would we have smiled and said something nice to him, or would we have run away from him? So, of course, if it's dark and dangerous, that's maybe something else. But you get the idea. It could be broad daylight also. It doesn't have to be nighttime. So that's why she says that a kind word can change somebody's life. So that's the example of it. And this commentator says, when the truth is unpleasant, the best course is to present the truth in as pleasant a way as possible. And flattery is often in tune with truthfulness and very pleasant to hear, but flattery for its own sake must be carefully avoided. Even great people have fallen victim to flattery and lost their bearings. So if we flatter people too much, we can make them, go backwards spiritually, and that's our fault. And daily chanting of scriptures, not only Vedas, with proper intonation is not only a perfect vocal training, but it also has a purificatory effect as well. So tapas of the mind is kind of a new concept. Tapas of speech is kind of a new concept for a lot of us. Usually when we hear that word tapas, we'll have these images popping up in our mind of people doing some bodily austerity. But we never think of it as being our speech. If at all, we might say, I'm just going to observe maunam, silence. What else is there to do? Well, Krishna has given us a number of answers to that question. So Jnanadev said we can learn a lot about a person from their speech. And this is especially true in challenging situations that reveal what lies beneath the surface. So in Amma's case, even a crisis reveals nothing but beauty and pure love. But with us, it can be the opposite. When somebody is mean to us or something, we may chant different mantras, 4-letter mantras, all kinds of mantras we might chant out loud, not silently. But when something happens to Amma, she will say like Shiva, Amma. Like today, she was talking about some difficult thing, and she says, and she was chuckling, and she just said, Amma, like that, laughing. We would have a nervous breakdown. A perfect example of the difference is the tsunami response. Tsunami in 2004, December, Amma was there. And most of you probably have seen the video of how courageous, loving, empathetic, and compassionate, tireless she was for weeks and weeks. She fed so many people, helped so many tens of thousands of people. Just over 5 years later was the Japanese, just over 6 years. It was the Japanese tragedy. And, Amma went, of course, later on, you probably saw that in the one of the videos. She went to the disaster area. But at the time of the disaster, a few of us went there also in person. But, we don't have the energy to do even a tiny fraction of what Amma did. She was one person. We had like 20 people. And they made multiple trips. And so it's just the capacity to help people and give soothing words and taking away their pain through that just bhava, their being. There's no comparison. So when everything is fine, we can talk politely, but when we get ruffled, angry, or scared, our vocabulary and tone change completely. In both cases, it is what lies deep in the subconscious mind that surfaces. So in Amma's case, it's complete beauty and fullness. But in our case, we usually regret what we said. That's the problem. Although we're talking about speech as a different type of tapas, it's really just a subtler level of action. It's an action, but it's subtler, that's why. And that means it needs a lot more shraddha and awareness, even more than physical actions. Also, the action of talking is easier than physical action because you don't have to exert yourself, you just start talking. And so that's why we may speak carelessly. You know, we need to reduce our mindless talking. And we can do that if we remember a few points about speech. I'm going to share some things here. So, around the early 1900s, about 1920, a saying came into usage. We shouldn't speak just because we have to say something. We speak because we have something to say, something worth saying. So we have to ask ourselves, is this worth saying? What is the benefit of my saying this? Will the listener be benefited at all? That's the first, thing we have to think about. Second is, am I clear about the subject matter in the first place? Because speaking without proper knowledge is worse than saying I don't know or saying nothing at all. So we have to make sure, do I really know what I'm talking about? People will say, I saw it on YouTube. It's like, okay, there's a billion things on YouTube. How do you know it's true? Don't tell me that I should change my life based on that, right? An important discussion. Third point is, we have to think of what that person needs. Is this what they need to hear? Or are they qualified to hear it? Will they be able to understand it? Are they interested in what I have to say? Maybe they're not interested at all. And do they trust my advice or your advice, or they trust me at all to listen to what I have to say? So unsolicited advice is called in Sanskrit vanarodhanam. Unsolicited advice. It means wailing in the forest, and there's nobody there. So when you do that, it's like the law of supply and demand. You're supplying your advice a lot, and what happens? The value goes down because the supply is way more than the need. What do they call it? Supply need chain? What is it? Supply demand chain. Right. Supply and demand. So supply is very high, demand is very low. It's like 0, -5, right? But if the supply is very minimal and the demand is very high, then it goes up in value. So whether our words are valued or not, it doesn't depend on the other person. It depends on how much discernment we have about when we talk. And some people just want to talk. They don't want to listen to us. So in such cases, it's better to let them talk until they're done. There's a funny story about one of the Swamis. This happened quite a long time ago. One of the Fortune 500 CEOs came to talk with this Swami. And he came and he says, I really need to talk with you. And the Swami said, okay. And then that man, who's a billionaire now, he runs one of the biggest companies in the US, he spoke non-stop for 2 hours. And the Swami just sat there, nodded his head and listened. And when the 2 hours was over, he said, really nice talking with you, Swami, and left. It's so funny, it's like, because he just wanted to talk. He didn't want to actually discuss anything. So there are people like that, just let them talk, they need it. And then the fourth point is, what is the right time to speak? Because it might not be the right time. And around Amma, that's very important, because in the morning it should be soft things. You don't suddenly talk about a crisis first thing in the morning unless it's, something that's going to affect Amma. And so, we should say nice things, and then when Amma's in her groove going faster, we can ask other things. And at nighttime, she has a different mood. She's very jovial, and the later it gets, the more jovial she gets. It's just making this midnight paradise of fun and games. Except for Devi Bhava's not like that so much. Anyhow, so especially with Amma, if somebody's there, they lost a family member, you don't tell a joke at that time or something like that, right? So the situation, the time of day, the mood of the moment, all these things, all these factors have to be considered. Some people may want to squeeze their question in when you're in a hurry or when you have something urgent to do. So we shouldn't do that to other people. When someone, you're in a rush and they're trying to stop you, it's not auspicious really, so we shouldn't do that to other people either. And if the person is mentally agitated, don't try to say anything to them because it's not going to work. It's an automatic disqualification, you could say. Unless you have something calming and soothing to say. And also, people who are angry, just don't even try to use logic. It doesn't help at all. It's better to just say nothing or say, like, can we talk about this a little bit later? So remember that our negativities are increased at nighttime. Nighttime is a very bad time to respond to an angry email. So the conversation always goes better if you put it off until the next morning, when the atmosphere is peaceful. It's especially true of emails, I promise you. I've seen it so many times. So Amma has a funny joke about this. There's a story about a professor who gives a speech in front of a big crowd. And he prides himself on his talks and how everybody likes his talks. And he got some letters afterwards, or we can say emails. And because when she first started telling this story, it was before there was email actually. So she said he got a lot of praiseful letters, but then there was one letter that came and said, if you don't know anything about the topic, you shouldn't give a talk at all. And it was like that cartoon thing, like steam comes out of their ears, right? He was so angry, his face turned bright red. And then he wrote a really mean, horrible letter to this person, which happens to be a woman. And he wrote, he used the choicest words to insult her, belittle her, and all these things. And then he said, well, maybe I don't want to make any spelling mistakes because I would look like a fool. So he was checking for spelling mistakes, and in the process, he realized that it was kind of too mean. I can't send this to her. And then he rewrited it a little bit. And then he read it, that the reread version, he said, oh, this is still not so good. And then he thought, I should just sleep on it. And so he slept on it, woke up the next morning, and he read it was really bad. So he kept writing it over and over and over again. And then finally, he sent a message to the woman. And this is what he came up with. Thank you so much for telling me, pointing out my faults. And I really appreciate that because it shows that you care. And by the way, I'd like to ask you out on a date, and maybe you would even consider marrying me. So, Amma's point is that, just careful shraddha to what you write and rewriting it can turn things 180 degrees around. Okay. Next point is this the right place to have this conversation? So I can tell you that my parents fought sometimes, but never in front of their kids. If they wanted to argue, they would go to their bedroom. We kind of knew what was going on, but they never did it in front of their kids. And that helped us feel a stable environment. Amma also prefers to talk in private when it's a sensitive matter. A person who is sensitive about criticism can only accept suggestions when they're given in private. But she can make it private during darshan also, like nobody can really hear what's going on. So even if a person's words or ideas seem to be wrong, we might want to tell them separately so that they don't take offense. And that will also increase the likelihood that they will accept what you have to say. How we say things is also crucial. Our choice of words really matters. They should be pleasant, pleasing words, but not mere flattery. And if you watch Amma, she can convey things in such a tender, loving, careful, and respectful way that the person doesn't even realize that they were just corrected or overruled. Amma wanted to do that, she's tried to do that, but actually, it just doesn't work. So even Amma's scoldings are so sweet, I can say, from experience. And when she doesn't, sometimes there are things we do that are not really so wonderful. And she can point it out in a very nice way. This wasn't a real scolding, but it was about my singing once. So it was a few years back here in Chicago ashram. And sometimes during the program here, with the cold, hot temperatures, I lose my voice. So, or it becomes very froggy, like a froggy voice. So I didn't want to sing bhajans, but I think the Chicago team, sorry guys, kind of twisted my arm, or maybe I only felt so. And so I said, okay, I'll sing a few songs. But it didn't go very well at all. I was not satisfied. In fact, I just felt like I shouldn't have done that. And I tried to forget about it. And then we got to Tokyo because it was the program after America. My froggy voice hadn't gotten any better. I think it got worse. The cough stopped, but I sounded like that. So after the meditation, Amma was like, your voice was so low, And I said, I can't do anything about it. I mean, even when I was singing, it was horrible, right? In Chicago. She says, no, it was okay. And nobody would have said that it was okay, And I said, Amma, the last song and she said, you did the alap, right? You did that humming. And I said, I didn't know what I was doing. It was a complete flop. She said, no. You kind of you went here, you went kind of over here, but in the end, you found the right note. It's like, okay, so nice of you to say that. So there's a positive and thoughtful way to say everything. But not if you don't have positivity and thoughtfulness. You need those in order to say positive and thoughtful things. So again, this is especially important when sending emails. So read and reread what you wrote several times and imagine how you might feel receiving such an email. Some people might say, to someone who forgot something, they would say I can't remember, did you return my book or not? If you already returned it, I'm sorry for even asking you. And obviously they didn't give it. And then they might even realize that we're indirectly reminding them, but they'll still appreciate our sensitivity to their own forgetfulness. These are all signs of maturity, so a gentle, indirect reminder it's all that's needed most of the time. And seventh, last, it is, what am I about to say? Is it truthful? Avoiding lies is definitely good, but simply honoring our words is also very important. If we repeatedly fail to honor our words, people will lose trust in us. And if we're unclear about something, it's better not to say anything. Don't make any promises. Each time we say something without sincerity, that creates a split personality in our mind. We say one thing and do another. And this becomes a deep-rooted habit, and we might not even know that we're doing it. It really doesn't take long for people to figure us out. And after that, they will have no trust in us at all. So it's a very dangerous habit. So again, the 4 key points are: don't say things that make people feel bad. Say things that are pleasant, beneficial, and true. And remember, all 4 of them have to be there for it to qualify. So it's a skill that we have to acquire over time, all these things. It doesn't just come so easily. And all these disciplines are part of the austerity of speech, which is mostly in the form of don'ts, like restraints. But Krishna gives one do, which is regular out loud reading of scriptures. And for us, that includes Amma's books, reading Amma's books out loud. Because when you read it like at bedtime, you can't, your eyes get blurry and your mind gets blurry and you're like, what did I just read? So if you read it out loud, you kind of force yourself to understand it. And chanting scriptures also counts, so that's good too. If you can know the meaning of the scriptures, it's even better. So with this, Krishna has concluded tapas at the level of mouth and body. the next is mental tapas, which is the most difficult one. So get ready for that. Next, verse 16. Mana prasada saumyatvam maunam atma vinigraha bhava samshuddhir ityetat tapo manasam uchyate. Together. Mana prasada saumyatvam maunam atma vinigraha bhava samshuddhirityeta tapo manasam uchyate. Cheerfulness, or we can say peace of mind, kindliness, contemplation, self-control, honesty of motive. This is called the mental austerity. Okay, now the commentaries clarify a few things about our translation, because as you might have noticed before, the translation of the ashram Gita, ashram version of the Gita, often takes into consideration the intended meaning according to Shankaracharya. So the word that is used for cheerfulness is actually peace of mind, or we'll get to that. It's the prasad of the mind, the gift of the mind. And he says that that's cheerfulness. So, but then kindliness, we can also call it gentleness. He says the state of mind that may be inferred from its effects, such as brightness of the face. So some people might say, "Hi, so nice to see you. Come on, I am my best buddy," but they don't really mean it. But Shankaracharya is saying that there will be a kind of a tejas, a brightness to the person's face that shows that they're genuinely gentle, genuinely kindly. So that's how he gives us some tips, which is a new way of thinking about these words. Silence is the word that is used for contemplation. So we have contemplation in our translation, and the original word is silence, or maunam. You might have noticed we chanted maunam. And Shankaracharya says, even silence in speech is necessarily preceded by control of thought. Right? So the effect, which is the silence of speech, is given for the cause, which is silence of the mind. Because you can't see the silence of the mind. So if you're physically silent, that's a sign that you're trying to, at least, or you maybe are truly silencing your mind. So he doesn't go for the surface interpretation. He goes straight to the cause, which is mental silence or contemplation. It's a beautiful way he's caught that. Self-control, or we can say self-restraint. Shankaracharya says that it refers to general control of the mind. And this is to be distinguished from silence, which was the silence of the mind. He says it's to be distinguished from that, which means the control of thoughts only so far as it concerns speech. So that word maunam, or silence, is referring to the mind, but only in the sense of speech. Now, the next word, self-control, refers to everything else in the mind. And honesty of motive is not a direct translation. the direct translation is purity of disposition. But Shankaracharya says, honesty of purpose in dealings with other people is what this means. So that's why we have translated as honesty of motive. Jnaneshwar says, his mind remains steady in the Supreme Self, freed from the webs of diverse ideas and fancies, in the way the waves leave a lake or the clouds leave the sky. He attains the blissful self and rids himself of anger. He's talking about a God-realized person, right? Talking about Amma, perhaps, but not an avatar, maybe just a realized being. His mind then becomes clean and beautiful like the firm, unspotted, and perfect moon. In such a state, the hardship of tapas is no more felt. The toilsome quest ceases. The trepidation of the mind is gone, and there remains only self-realization in perfect form. The mouth, which was formerly used for the faculty of speech to ponder over and expound the scriptures, that same mouth now absolutely refuses to use the faculty of speech. Having secured the realization of the Supreme Self, the mind loses its nature and remains merged in the self in the way salt dissolves and becomes one with water. In such a state, from where can the emotions arise? There's nowhere for it to arise from. When the mind attains such a state, it becomes eligible to the name austerity of mind. He takes like the ultimate state as austerity of the mind. So Shankaracharya makes it a little more practical for us, whereas Jnaneshwar gives us like the ultimate goal. And a more current or modern commentary says, peace of mind is being established in blissful calmness. Gentleness is being kindly disposed towards all. Silence is keeping all thinking in a state of equilibrium. Control of the mind is superior to control of the tongue and the body. Only permitting pure and noble thoughts to arise in the mind, that is self-control. What is in the mind expresses itself as words and actions. One who has mastery over their mind never utters an unwanted word and never does an undesirable action. When a person's temperament is friendly and happy, they are said to be imbued with purity of disposition. So, Jnaneshwar has interpreted this word differently from Shankaracharya. You can understand that, right? Maintaining this benign state of mind under all circumstances is the austerity of mind. So when Shankaracharya was referring to that word cheerfulness, he's talking about the gift or the prasad of the mind. So it's such a beautiful word, I feel, because it emphasizes Amma's teaching. What is the prasad that you get from your mind? Amma says, more than God's grace, we need the grace of our own mind. So what is the mind's grace? It is peace, calm, quietude, tranquility, serenity, all these things that we yearn for. But keeping the mind calm can be so difficult in Kali Yuga that it has become a tapas. In Satya Yuga, it just happens naturally because everything is wonderful. And people are used to tapas. They don't think anything of it. So the how of this point, how do I get the manasa prasada, that means the prasad of my mind. How do I get that? Well, for that, to answer for that, you have to read the Gita up to here, because this is the second to last chapter. Krishna has already given so many do's and don'ts to have mental peace. So we have to go back chapter 2, 3, 4, and so on. And also many of Amma's books talk about how to maintain our peace of mind. And the main thing she says is start with your mantra. And then you can try to cultivate acceptance. We strive as much as we can, but we have to accept the outcome. And we may make a lot of effort, but we have to remember that everything is in Amma's hands, so we have to surrender. And then we can try selfless prayers, we can try awareness and action. So many ways to keep our peace of mind. But the next point here is kindliness, gentleness. And it sounds like a kind of a day-to-day thing that's not a big deal, but it's deeper than it sounds. What it really means is being nice to others and sincerely desiring that good comes to everyone, not just to your family and yourself, even to people who are not nice to you. So instead of arguing with them, we can just pray that good things happen to them. If they're a mean person, well, then they're already suffering due to the anger inside of them. We can't even stand being with them, but just imagine being stuck with that mind. They are suffering already from their own mind. So isn't that worthy of some compassion from us? So we can try to think of it that way. And Amma also says that anger is a disease. So we can consider angry people to be sick and in need of help. And she says, like, it's a disease, so why fight with them and contract the highly contagious disease of anger? You know, we can just visualize the white flowers of peace falling on their head. Once a devotee woman sent an email to one of the Swamis and said, Swami, you know, whenever I'm angry with my husband, I try to visualize the white flowers of peace falling down on him. But I must confess, sometimes it's not the white flowers of peace, it's the brown coconuts of pain falling on his head. So, Shankaracharya has already explained why silence is a mental tapas. And at a certain point, the noise of the mind overflows from the mouth. I think we've experienced that. Especially, I've noticed, during COVID, people have said that they have developed a habit of talking to themselves during the pandemic. The problem is there's a lot of talking going on in the mind and there's nobody to listen. So it's talking to themselves, and then, you know, they don't even realize they're talking to themselves. And even if we observe silence physically, if the mind is still full of a lot of thoughts, we won't be able to sustain that silence or that maunam for very long. Once I decided I was going to observe maunam as long as I could. I think I got up to 10 days or 11 days maybe. But on that last day, I was standing by the spiral staircase. There was no big hall in the back, the main hall. It's just the Kali temple at that time. So Amma would go up that spiral staircase, and some of us would just sit there, wait for her to come and get a glimpse of her before we went back to our seva. And Amma came up to me and she asked me a question. And I went like, you know, and Amma's like, what? And someone told her in Malayalam, he's in Maunam. And then she's like, oh, okay. And I didn't break my Maunam. I thought, oh, I did a good thing because I didn't talk. But it's like when the Guru asked, everyone was like, what's wrong with you, idiot? When the Guru asks, you can talk. And then after getting berated by them, you know, I had to, silently endure it. Then I went back to the computer room where I was doing my seva. And I sat down, I was feeling kind of depressed. And then someone came over and said, no, where's the such and so? And I said, oh, it's over there. Oh, God. For something completely, meaningless, I broke my silence because my mind was so convoluted that time because I just had that traumatic mistake. So even if you do it, you try. If your mind doesn't calm down, it can't last very long. And some people carry a pen and pencil around because they can't stop writing. I want to say something, but I can't move my lips, so I'm going to move my hand. Like that. They chase after you with the paper. And so that's kind of sad. It just shows that we can't stop talking. There was once a woman who, she used to talk a lot. I mean, we all do, but this person definitely had trouble with Maunam, but she tried it. She wanted to observe Maunam, which is really, that's a lofty goal for sure. So I found out later that while she was in Maunam, she went to the room of somebody and went, one of the Swamis, and he says, "Who is it?" Dead silence. "Who is it?" No sound. And then and he says, "Well, who is it?" He got a little angry. And then the person said from the other side, "Maunam." What are you doing here on my doorstep? That's what you would think, right? Crazy. Probably she had a long letter written that she wanted him to read. I don't know. But all such things reveal a lack of mental control for all of us. And that proves that mental tranquility is required for physical silence. So that's the proof that Shankaracharya was referring to a little while ago. Self-control, restraint. Self, if you use that version of it, it's simply reference to the physical and subtle bodies, because we consider those to be us. That's me. I'm the body, I'm the mind, and the intellect. We rarely ever, if at all, identify with the Atman. So, but we also have to safeguard that calmness. So we may feel a little calm at times when nothing's harming us or nothing's disturbing us. But self-control is really about not allowing the peace of mind to degrade so easily. So we don't allow the mind to go towards those things that disrupt our mental peace. The mind may want to hang out with anger, greed, jealousy, infatuation, whatever it is. But the mind cannot hang out with those bad boys without our permission. It can be tacit permission. It's kind of like you don't object to that emotion when it enters your mind. That's still, we could have stopped it if we tried, but we're not trained to do so. So we kind of let it in, and then we suffer. So once it's there, then the mind starts brooding on something, whatever it is, and it inflates little things into a huge mountain of anger, passion, envy, lust, whatever it might be. And though it's all in our mind, we know it's all in our mind, still our heartbeat races and our mind becomes like Katrina, Hurricane Katrina. And this is how Krishna explains it in chapter 2, verse 62. Pondering on objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them. From attachment springs desire, and from desire gives rise to anger. So when we're angry about something, that means some desire was there. And how did that desire come? Because I have attachment to something. And how did the attachment come? That came from all my daydreaming about something. So we know what daydreaming is like. We just don't connect that with the attachments that we develop later. So just like negative thoughts create a downward whirlpool, noble thoughts create an upward vortex of positive energy. So one is sort of unconscious. Negative thoughts, you're not going to say, I'm going to get really angry right now. And now at 4:30, I'm going to get jealous and all these things. It's all unconsciously taking place. So, but positive thoughts and noble ideas can be done voluntarily. So that's the only way to really neutralize the negative thoughts. In order to preserve our peace of mind, awareness of our thoughts is thus very essential. Without that, it's like a landlord who has no idea who is occupying their building, how they got here, what are they doing, and how to evict them. You're the owner of the building, but you can't do anything about it. I heard there was a case in India where somebody had this big house and he leased it out to one guy. That guy leased one room, but somehow he took over the whole building, and then the owner couldn't get in it anymore. And what are you going to do? It'll take years to go through a legal case, especially in India. So we're like that. The Atma is our birthright, but we can't get to it because we don't know what all these bad boys are doing inside of us. And we don't know how to evict them either. So with this, the 3 levels of tapas are now over. When we heard the first one, it sounded bad enough. But the difficulty only increased in the following 2 verses. So, which ended with this last verse we just finished. So, it gets difficult. So, what do? Well, we start on the physical level because that's easier. And then as and when we get more self-confidence, we can try to work on our words, our speech. And then through all these efforts, gradually we'll start to get more mental control or mental tapas. And it won't be that bad. It takes a long time. I think all of us know that from experience. So eventually what happens, I would say from my own experience, because I haven't achieved it completely, so long as we learn to like these sadhanas, like that bit of tapas, then our growth is guaranteed. But if we always kind of resent the tapas, then it's going to be very slow going the whole way. So that's up to us. Amma says you can take the local bus or the fast bus. So it's up to us what we want to do. And Jnanadev has an introduction to the next verse, which is, now I will explain to you how this 3-fold austerity is divided through its association with the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas. Hear and digest it with your powerful intellect. Krishna is saying that to Arjuna. So you got the basic, components of the tapas, right? Now I'm going to divide it up into 3 based on the quality, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And that we're going to see in the next class. I am not 100% sure that I can do the class next week, everybody. I hope to be able to do it. And so just look out for emails from MA Center Chicago, and you'll find out what's going to happen next week and the week after. Because we have a big retreat coming up and other things. It's a big time for the farm in Chicago, a lot of things happening here. So I'll do my best. And we will chant the first 2 mantras, closing mantras or prayers, and then meditate. You can join us for a short meditation if you have time. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwariye Namaha. Let us close our eyes and meditate together for some time. Check your posture. Try to keep your back and neck as straight as possible. And take a few long, deep breaths. With each deep inhalation and exhalation, feel your body and mind relaxing further and further. Feel yourself wrapped in Amma's arms through her subtle presence. Feel the tenderness of her embrace. Feel the warmth of her love. Now let us gradually bring our attention to our heart, the center of our chest. Visualize Amma's form there, or the form of your beloved deity. It can also be just a light, a radiance. This is how we can understand the presence of divinity within ourselves. Amma's form radiating from within our heart. Imagine how we would treat others physically if we could see the Amma in them, the radiance of their face. Not only human beings, all life forms. Imagine feeling as much love for all beings as we have towards Amma. Physically, we could never harm them. Physically, we know they cannot hurt us because they are one with us. Even the next level of speech, if we see that divinity Amma's presence in someone or something, there's no need to struggle with kind words. They would come automatically. We would never say anything mean, conceited, no words prompted by jealousy. Only loving words would come from our mouth. And if we had that awareness of the divinity, the Amma within us, it doesn't matter how others treat us. They may be mean to us, they may betray us, they may do anything, but we are immersed in the bliss of her, the mother of immortal bliss. Nothing can shake our peace of mind. Let us all also bow down mentally to Amma's feet and invite her to come and abide within our heart. When Amma is there in our heart, all the negativities will run away. They cannot exist in her presence. Now we will conclude the meditation with one more closing prayer. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes if you wish. Om Namah Shivaya. And I'll see you all soon.